Autumn is absolutely here and in full swing, and there's nothing better than filling your kitchen with the warm, comforting smells of homemade baked goods. I absolutely love it, and if you've been around here for any length of time, you know I'm passionate about it. Today we're diving into some cozy from scratch baking that's perfect for those autumn days. Everything from gooey chocolate chips to rustic granola, as I like to call it, and soft sandwich bread. Whether you're looking to bake with classic ingredients or adapt them to fit your family's needs, this is just a treat and an absolutely perfect way to get cozy. So let's do some baking together. Hello there and welcome back to my channel. Today we're just gonna get cozy in the kitchen with some autumn baking. I absolutely love this time of year, and I love cooking for my family. When the leaves start changing, the air just gets so fresh and crisp, and the kitchen just feels like the absolute heart of the home. And there's something about baking from scratch that brings me a sense of sort of peace. Today I wanted to share some of my favourite go-to recipes, not just for autumn, for kind of all year round, but they are the perfect flavours of autumn. I'm going to walk you through some classic chocolate chip cookies, fudge brownies, granola, a sandwich bread, and these recipes are easy and adaptable. And I do it with my 2 toddlers hanging at my hips and 39 weeks pregnant, so don't worry about it. They're easy enough to do, and they are sure to fill your kitchen with the best autumn feelings. So grab your apron and let's start baking. First up, we're making classic chocolate chip cookies, and I'm using a recipe from King Arthur Baking. I don't normally use this recipe, but I really enjoyed it. I normally use my husband's recipe that he had in school, but I couldn't find it, so this is what I used instead, and they turned out perfectly. And for this you'll need 2/3 of a cup of brown sugar, 2/3 of a cup of granulated sugar, 1/2 cup of butter, 1/2 cup of shortening, and I didn't actually have any shortening, so I just added extra butter, a tablespoon of vanilla extract, 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, 1 egg, 2 cups of all-purpose flour, and lots of chocolate chips. I think it calls for 2 cups, but just go crazy. And we just literally cream it all together. You want a nice light and fluffy texture here, and then mix in your egg and vanilla extract, and then you're going to combine your flour, baking soda and salt, and gradually add the dry ingredients to the wet, mixing until just combined. You don't want to overmix these, and fold in those chocolate chips, and we're ready to bake. And then you're going to drop spoonfuls of dough onto a baking sheet. I put parchment paper on mine at 375 degrees Fahrenheit. Now I can't think off the top of my head what that is in degrees Celsius, because it's an American recipe, and I do have an oven thermometer that tells me when it's at 375. But you're going to bake them for 10 to 12 minutes, or until golden brown, just literally golden brown around the edges. And just like that, you've got a batch of classic chocolate chip cookies. They are crispy on the outside and chewy in the middle, and honestly absolutely perfect with a glass of milk. Feel free to adapt this recipe as well with what you have on hand. Don't feel like you can't bake because you don't have certain things. You can always sort of make it work. If you're short on chocolate chips, you can add some chopped nuts or even swap in white chocolate. That'd be a fun twist. But don't feel like you can't get started baking. I honestly tend to just start baking and then realise what I don't have and then figure out what I can use instead. A homemaking tip that I live by on baking days and cook lots of big bulk cooking days is to have a hot bowl of soapy water in the sink ready to go. You can throw in all of those things that you don't have multiples of, like I don't have a second KitchenAid bowl and I use my KitchenAid all the time, or the beater and things like that. Just throw it in the hot water, give it a quick rinse and it's ready to go again, rather than having to run the dishwasher over and over and then wait for all the things and then feel like you've got a huge pile of dishes at the sink. You can just wash them quick rinse, dry and move on. Next, we're moving on to recipe number 2, and it is ultimate chewy brownies. These chewy brownies are taken from the King Arthur Baking website again. I think it is hands down one of the best brownie recipes I have tried, and I have tried a few at this point. I honestly think that the King Arthur Baking website is very reliable and everything I make from there tends to work out okay. So it's one of those websites I'll just quickly type in something I wanted to make and then try and adapt a recipe that they have on there for what we have on hand. But for this you'll need 1 cup of unsalted butter. I used salted, it was fine. 2 1/4 cups of sugar, 4 large eggs. We like to get our eggs fresh from a family friend farm, and 1 1/4 cups of cocoa powder, 1 teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon of baking powder, 1 teaspoon of espresso powder. I used decaf instant coffee. I didn't have enough left. I wanted to add more, but I didn't have enough. But it enhances that chocolate flavour. It's just delicious. We have 1 tablespoon of vanilla extract and 1 1/2 cups of all-purpose flour and 2 cups of chocolate chips or chunks. I threw in a load of chocolate chips. I think the more you add, the better to any of these kind of recipes. So for me, this was kind of more of a dump and go into the KitchenAid, limited on time, nap times closing up here. And so I dumped it all into the KitchenAid and spread it out onto a baking sheet, a baking pan, a 9 by, I think this is 9 by 9, the recipe might call by 9 by 13, but again, just be adaptable, just go with it and see what happens. That's my motto. And you're going to bake this at, again, 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Sorry about not knowing the Celsius, it is an American website. For about 30 minutes. And you'll know they're done when a toothpick is inserted and the centre comes out with just a few moist crumbs. You do want it to be a little bit wet, but not too wet. And these brownies are incredibly chewy, rich and perfect for a cosy autumn evening with a cup of tea or a glass of wine. That is a no-go for me at the moment, being this pregnant, but hopefully soon. And they are just delicious. You can obviously adapt this recipe easily. If you don't have espresso powder, etc., just leave it out. You can add nuts or drizzle caramel on top for something extra special, or make it look pretty by adding some icing sugar, sprinkled icing sugar all the way over the top. I made this for a youth group we had and they went down really, really well. And everybody loved it, so I would absolutely recommend. Now we're gonna move on to something a little bit healthier, but still cozy and delicious, and it's a homemade rustic granola. Now I am sort of following a recipe here, but honestly, I've done this so many times, I kind of make it up and I add whatever I have on hand. It is inspired by one on Farmhouse on Boone, but I've adapted it again to meet my family's needs. And so the recipe on her website calls for 4 cups of old-fashioned oats, a cup of nuts, a cup of dried fruit, half a cup of honey or maple syrup. I used maple syrup in this recipe, half a cup of coconut oil. I added more because you kind of want the recipe to be quite nice and wet. 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, that was a must for getting this autumn delicious flavour, 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract, and a pinch of salt. And you just mix it all together. I also added lots of desiccated coconut to this, a bunch of chia seeds, some leftover flax seeds, anything honestly just to boost the health aspect to this, and whatever I have on hand in the cupboard. As long as you're getting the consistency right when you add the wet ingredients, then you'll be absolutely fine. And I do have a tip for making this granola turn out pretty perfect every time. But once you've mixed everything together, you want to whisk together the coconut oil and honey and vanilla and salt, and pour the wet ingredients over the dry ingredients and mix until everything is coated. And that is a key part of getting this granola working, is just making sure that everything is evenly coated. And that perfect tip that I have is to, when you put it on your parchment paper, you put it on your baking cookie tray, you want to spread it out and flatten it down, almost like you're making granola bars. You spread it out, press it down with your fingers, and turn it into a real flat sheet of almost one big granola bar, and then bake that in the oven at about 300 for about 20 minutes to ensure everything, maybe 25 to 30 minutes actually, stirring halfway through to ensure that everything is browning. And once it's golden and crispy, you let it cool completely. It's still flat, it's still like one big crispy granola bar at this point. And then you're going to go in and break it all up with your fingers. And that is the point where you can add your dried fruit. I like to add chocolate chips to this, just a few. You don't have to do that, but lots of nice dried fruits, really nice in the autumn to add dried cranberries and something orangey in there. It's really, really delicious, and we've been thoroughly enjoying it as a family with some lovely fresh Greek yogurt. But pressing that down is my absolute tip here. It's gonna really make sure that everything gets cooked evenly, and then breaking it up with your fingers. This recipe is so versatile. You can literally add whatever nuts or dried fruit you have on hand. If you don't like almonds, you don't have to add almonds. You can add Brazil nuts, anything you have on hand that would work in these kind of flavors. And it's perfect for just topping off with yogurt or just snacking on by itself, honestly. Next up on my list here, we have a classic white sandwich bread, and I've been loving this particular sandwich bread loaf for many reasons. It is a yeast bread, it's not a sourdough loaf. And I can tell you the story of my sourdough starter maybe in another video. It's kind of embarrassing, and so I currently don't have a sourdough starter, and so I'm working on making a new one. And that's why I've been using yeast bread in the house at the moment. But it's a classic white sandwich bread that you dump into the stand mixer, and that's what I absolutely love, especially when it's big bulk baking days like today, all in a stand mixer, and let the hard job be done for you. And you'll need 2 cups of warm water, 1/4 cup of sugar, 1 tablespoon of instant yeast, 1/4 cup of unsalted butter. Again, I use salted, 1 tablespoon of salt, and 5.5 to about 6 cups of all-purpose flour. And you're letting that knead in the stand mixer for quite some time. And you really just want to get to the point where it's a really nice soft dough, and it feels very light and airy when it's at that point. And that's the point to stop it and let it sit in an oiled bowl for about an hour. I leave it sometimes 2, depending on where we're at in the day. Bread is quite flexible mostly, so don't worry too much. But in an oiled covered bowl, and let that get nice and fluffy. And once it's risen, then it's time to roll out the dough. And I kind of have just picked up a few techniques on the way. This is not how the recipe does it, but I tend to just roll out the dough and fold it into a loaf shape, and then let that sit in the loaf pan. The recipe says to oil the top of the loaf and cover with cling film, and then let that rise again for about an hour while the oven preheats, etc., which works really, really well. And then you pop it in the oven. And then I like to add some butter on top just to soften that crust slightly when it comes out. That was it before going into the oven. Nice and puffy. It's got a huge lip over the side, rubbed with some salted butter to soften the crust, and it's absolutely delicious. Works perfect for sandwiches and is almost as good as a sourdough loaf. Before you go, please be sure to subscribe for more cozy kitchen and homemaking content. I love autumn and I hope you will love it as much as I do, so stay cozy, friends. Bye bye.